name is Gary Fox, entrepreneur and podcast host of the Entrepreneur Experiment. Thank you for joining us today for the Redefining Business, Entrepreneurship and Connectivity in the Digital Era. Make sure to join the conversation online on Twitter and Facebook at Business Show IRL, and be sure to use the hashtag Rebooting Ireland. David, welcome to the Business Show.
Gary, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute honor to meet you. I was delighted when I knew the session was going to happen. So it's been an interesting year. The title of the talk is Redefining Business. So I think what I'd like to start by asking you is, how does the last 12 months change the business landscape?
Well, I think, Gary, in reality, it changes everything. And there's going to be huge winners and huge losers by this, unfortunately, like every transformational change. I think I think people are underestimating how transformational this year of COVID really is going to be to all of us. Now, the good news is it's going to speed up the way people think through problems. It's going to speed up the way businesses are run and the way problems are solved. It's going to allow people to work from wherever they are. It's going to allow businesses to recruit people from wherever they are, whether they're in rural Ireland or whether they're in Dublin. So that's a big benefit. But small businesses, a young couple that saved up for 10 years to open their own little store or their own little retail business, these people are getting wiped out, and it's awful. And I don't think we've got our head around how devastating that is to the retail sector, the pub sector, just anybody who was accustomed to lots of foot traffic around a big office building. For instance, the big office buildings aren't going to be full every day like they were before. So if you have a 20% margin in your little coffee shop, and all of a sudden 20% of your customers aren't there anymore, that's your whole margin. So now you're working for free. So I don't think we've got our head around how devastating that's going to be for those small businesses. And we all have to obviously chip in one way or another to figure out how to support them as we come out of this pandemic. We have to figure out, making sure from a policy standpoint that we support these businesses from a government standpoint, but also just from a human standpoint. We just got to make sure that we remember to support all those local businesses when we come back out of this pandemic.
Honestly, I'm delighted you said that, because very few people are speaking as openly as that. Everyone is saying it's terrible in very general terms, and very few people are defining it exactly like you did. It affects these people in this way. And how do you think, if they're listening to you right now and that sense of control and powerlessness is with them, what can they do? How can they seize the control back themselves?
Well, Gary, that's a tough one, because lots of, you see a lot of these social media sites and you read all these self-help books, pull yourself up with the bootstraps and all that stuff. And that doesn't resonate with people that don't have any boots, right? So, go pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But if you first have to have a pair of boots. So a lot of these people really got a really bad hand dealt to them that was of no, which is of no consequence of their own behavior. It just happened. So they have a really, really tough situation. Now, unfortunately, it is what it is. So they're going to have to rethink their business. They're going to have to rethink, what does the modern day pub look like? What does a modern day coffee shop look like? What does, retail at street level look like? They're just going to have to rethink their whole business. And they're not going to be able to do it in an incremental way. They're not going to be able to say, I'm going to tweak this and tweak that. And they're not going to be able to copy other models. They're going to have to rethink. They're going to have to take a piece of paper and say, okay, this is the current situation, and this is the way the world works on a going forward basis. Here's what I have. Here are the pieces I have. Just like, remember that Apollo 13 when they had trouble, and the guy on ground control said, okay, tell me all the pieces you have, lay them out on the table, everything, including a thumbtack or a paper clip. Let me know what you have, and then we'll solve the problem with those pieces, and failure is not an option. I don't know if you remember that movie. I had a chance to have dinner with that guy that said failure is not an option, and it was fascinating. But that's the situation these businesses are in now. They have to say, here's what I have, here are the pieces I have, and here's the situation I'm in. And they have to think out how people are going to live and work going forward. They can't think it's going to go back to the old way. The world never goes backwards. Each chapter is new. And they've got to say, okay, here's where I am. Here's what the world's going to look like. Now what do I do? And people who can figure that out will be fine. But it's not easy. And some people are at a age where they might not have time to be able to rethink their whole business. Some people are going to be wiped out completely. They're not going to have the money to be able to rethink their business. So I don't think people want to talk about how devastating it is to some small businesses because it's too painful. It's too painful to talk about the millions and millions of jobs. Like, I'm guessing 20% of the jobs are never coming back, ever. And that's tough. People talk about retraining and all that stuff. If you've been doing the same thing for 30 years, retraining is a great soundbite, but it's not realistic. It's just not realistic.
Exactly. And you've summed it up beautifully there. And I think no one's having that hard conversation. So it's great to have that here today. It's because I think we need to face up to it now. We're in the middle of it. I think that's why people aren't willing to face up to it, because things are so tough that people are like, oh, I can't even picture what the future will look like. But you touched on something really interesting there. Incremental changes. What got you here won't get you there. How do you think about change?
Well, look, I wrote a book about this called Total Rethink, and I have a philosophy about transformational thinking. I think if you don't have, the first thing you want to have in life is luck, right? So if you can't have that, plan B is a combination of access to technology, transformational thinking or a new way of thinking, and confidence. If you have those three things, if you have some confidence that you'll be okay, if you have a new way of thinking and you have access to technology, you can solve most any problem. Now you'll underestimate how much you can solve in 1 year, but you'll underestimate what you can solve in 5 years. So, we've been doing things the same way for hundreds of years. And if you just go back to the Industrial Revolution to sort of the 1990s, everything was about incremental change. Everything was about one more little tweak, one more little turn of inventory. They had code names for Six Sigma and another point of EBITDA and another turn of inventory. Now it's not about that anymore. Now it's about a whole new transformational rethink of problems. And I'm talking about big problems: healthcare, housing, education. These are the judicial system. I mean, these are big problems that need to be totally rethought. And we can't keep on doing them, trying to solve those problems the same way we have for hundreds of years. It's just not going to work. The internet and the way we communicate now, exacerbated by COVID, has just made those old ways of thinking not applicable to the current set of problems.
You mentioned connectivity there, and I think a lot of people watching today will be curious to get your thoughts on that, because I think broadband is one of those things we kind of, yes, it was great and it was coming, but the last year has just accelerated that demand exponentially. What are your thoughts on connectivity, specifically within Ireland?
Well, look, Ireland has been very bold in saying every man, woman, and child is going to have a fiber. Ireland was very bold when they said that we're going to make sure our whole population is educated. They were very bold when they said we're going to have a business-friendly tax scheme and we're going to hang tough on this. They were very bold when they said we're going to spend a lot of money to build a road system to connect all these areas of Ireland. So they've been incredibly bold in the past, and it's paid off. Ireland is 5th globally in exporting services. Okay, a little tiny country, 5th globally. Ireland has been incredibly bold, and it's paid off. This new move was incredibly bold. And as you know, it was criticized a lot when it was first announced. And now everybody is saying, thank God that we're rolling this out. But remember, The National Broadband Plan is the foundation. You can't have a house without a foundation, but you also need the walls and the roof and the window and the doors. So we have to, as a business community, develop the products and services that lay on top of that national broadband. When I built the first competitive phone company in America, it was, you know, the AT&T, my competitor, was still trying to shove data through twisted pair copper lines, right? And they came up with that uninnovative product called dial-up internet access, where you'd wait, right? You'd be waiting for minutes, hours, whatever, for something to download. Well, we built the new network. We wrote voice virtually free on top of that network. Voice was free. And then we developed other products on top of that. We have to do the same thing with national broadband. We have to, as a business community, develop the products and services that lay on top of that fiber to solve problems around the environment, around healthcare, around education, around these big problems that need to be solved. And the fiber is just the foundation. Otherwise, if we don't do that, you know, what will we have done? We'll have brought Netflix to, you know, Claire and Kerry, which is not the intent. The intent is to be transformational and allow people in rural Ireland to grow their business or start a business or encourage other businesses to move to rural Ireland or hire people, at least in rural Ireland.
How do you think this change? You started to touch on it there. How does this change entrepreneurship in Ireland?
Look, Ireland has the potential to be the most entrepreneurial country in Europe. It has all the ingredients. It has all the things you need. I don't know if you read that book, Startup Nation, which was about Israel and about what a great community Israel was to start a business. Well, you know, I've sort of coined this phrase, Rise Rural Ireland, which is what I want to see happen in rural Ireland. I want to see rural Ireland be the most entrepreneurial place in Europe, and it can do it. What do you need? You need educated people. We have that. It's helpful if you speak English because it's a universal language. We have that. It's helpful if you don't have lots of enemies around the world. We have that. It's necessary that you have access to technology. We now will have that. So we have all the pieces, and you know, what else do you need? You need confidence, and you need to know that it's okay to fail. That's one thing that we have. You know, I'm a dual citizen, so I spent half my year. I have a house in America and I have a house in Ireland, and I split my time. And one thing that America does better than any other country in the world is if you fail and try again and fail again and try again, but eventually succeed, you are sort of put at the top of the food chain. People respect you more if you fail and then get up and try again. People in America don't mind if you fail, as long as you don't complain about it, you don't bitch about it, you pick yourself up and you try again. A lot of countries, you know, once you fail, they sort of put you in a different class or a different bucket. In America, they don't. Unless you complain about it, unless you blame other people, unless you say, you know, that was Gary's fault, you know, then they do. But if as long as you take responsibility for it yourself and say, okay, I messed up, I failed, now I'm going to try again. And the truth is, as an entrepreneur, you only need one success. You know, you can spend 20 years failing for one success. And you have to learn. Every time you fail, you have to say, okay, I fell down. Here's why I fell down. Here's what happened. And that's one thing I'm not going to do again. Then you fail again. You say, okay, that's another thing. I'm not encouraging people to fail. I'm just saying, if you do, you have to have the confidence to pick yourself back up. Now, and it's not easy. And the older you get, obviously, the harder it becomes, because you have more responsibilities. You have family, and you might have kids, and you might have other bills to pay. You might have parents to take care of, whatever. So it gets harder. So I guess it's like, how do you get good asparagus? You start 7 years ago. You know, how do you get successful? You start young and early, right? Like, it's just like everything else. Start 7 years ago.
That's incredible advice. Start yesterday. What you mentioned confidence there. And I think a lot of people I'm talking to, I chat to a lot of entrepreneurs every week, their confidence has been dented. Even seasoned entrepreneurs. I talked to an entrepreneur this morning, 19 years in business. And he says, my self-belief is gone, Gary. So how do you cultivate that back up again after the year?
Well, you let that man or woman that you talk to, they got to spend a minute of mourning. Okay, so they've been wiped out. So that we got to allow them to sit back and feel bad for themselves for a day or two or a week or however long it takes them. Then they've have no choice but to say, okay, here's where we are. Here's the situation. I have been wiped out, which is terrible, which is awful. But what got them to where they were pre-pandemic, that grit, that integrity, that persistence, that understanding of the customer needs, all the things that got them there, they still have. That wasn't taken away. All those ingredients that made them successful, they still have. And they have to then wake up and look in the mirror and say, I have all those things. None of them were taken away from me. This is not like, unfortunately, there are people whose health is taken away from them and they're really screwed, right? And sometimes that's not their fault. It's some things happen. And that's a really tough one. But if that entrepreneur you're talking about, assuming they still have their health, they have all the qualities that got them to where they are. So they need to say, okay, I got to call on those things. I've spent 19, that person you said 19 years, they've got to say, I spent 19 years getting ready for this moment. I spent 19 years preparing for this moment. I've got to now dig into that bag of tricks that I developed over 19 years. I got to pull them out and I got to put them to work because you have no choice. There is no other way to do it.
What excites you? Because we've talked about the negativity and how tough it's been. What excites you about the next year, 5 years?
I think I have personally, look, Gary, I've been very, very lucky. Okay. And I've had people like my mother that helped me develop confidence. I've had, access to a good education, and I developed a new way of a new philosophy, a new way to think out problems where I put myself in the future and I say, okay, this is what the future looks like. And I'm going to turn around and look backwards to where I am today and say, okay, in my imagination, how did I get there? And then I go back and go to work and doing that, right? So I don't stand in the present and look forward. I put myself in the future and turn around and look backwards, right? So I think now I have a chance to help other people develop that philosophy, because we need all those young people to solve all those big problems. And if we can give them a new philosophy and a new way of thinking, they can solve those problems. We can solve the environmental problem. We can solve the housing problem. We can solve the cost of education problem and the access or lack of access to education. I'm talking about globally. I mean, we were on a track pre-pandemic, Gary, with globally 3 million people a week were either being born or moving to an urban environment. That means that every 3 weeks, we were creating another New York or another London or another Hong Kong in the globe. Every 3 weeks, we're creating another city of that size, right? That's crazy. That was crazy. And that was not only making housing costs go up, not only making the environment get hammered, congestion, the cost of logistics, the cost of food, the cost of education, everything was going up, and people were being crammed into these urban environments. And at the same time, rural areas were being stripped. Rural areas were being stripped of everything, and they were nothing more than a place to commute from. So that was unsustainable, but no one wanted to deal with it because it's a tough thing to deal with. You've got to really say, okay, I'm going to take a long-term view of solving their problem. And I'm, like all of us, during COVID, you put on a little winter weight during COVID because you're working from home and the refrigerator is always there and you're grabbing something and you're doing whatever. So when I left Ireland, so I was in Ireland, I was for the first little bit of COVID, I was in Ireland, and then I came back to the States because I have 2 kids here, and I didn't know what was happening with COVID, what was going to happen with the ability to travel. So I spent 6 months here in the States in Los Angeles. Then I spent 8 months in County Clare, right? So when I came back here, I said, okay, so we gotta take care of this little bit of COVID winter weight, right, that you put on. So I said, okay, 2/10 of a pound a week. That's all you have to do, right? 2/10 of a pound. Then every 10 days, it's a pound. Right now, I'm lucky because my winter weight was only 3 or 4 pounds. So, I'm lucky. But that's how you do it. You just chip away at it a little bit at a time, consistently and constantly until you've achieved your goal. You don't say, this goal is too big, this is too hard. You chip away at it, right? Same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
We were almost out of time, but I have one last question just on what you talked about there. How do you plan your day, week, and month on that? Just how do you build those incremental goals in?
Well, look, I'm lucky in that I like to get up early, right? So the first thing I do is I get up, no matter what time of year it is, before the sun rises, right? So I pride myself in being up, dressed, and ready to go while the world is still asleep, right? And usually, if I'm in either Miami or Los Angeles, I go for a walk and I make phone calls and watch the sun come up, right? So I get 3 or 4 phone calls you can get done early. So if I'm in California, I get up at 4. If I'm in the East Coast, I get up, closer to 5:30 or 6 and make phone calls while I'm walking. And I make sure I get my 3 to 5 miles of walking done in the morning and I can make phone calls. And you can see God's beautiful sun coming up and it makes you feel great. And then I, like everyone else, have a series of meetings that are too many and too long and too confusing, but you have them. And then I carve out time at the end of the day to go through, and I've kept a little notebook. They all look the same. I've kept them for 30 years. And I write down all my follow-ups. And then if I start getting a little blurred because I have too much stuff going on, I take a step back and I say, okay, what's the one thing I need to focus on tomorrow? And and there's a great book called The One Thing. And it's true. It all comes down to one thing. There's sort of like 1 or 2 things you need to focus on. So I'll write those 1 or 2 things down and I'll say, okay, tomorrow I really got to focus on that. Then I'll look at those meetings and I'll say, do they tie into that one thing? And then I end up in the middle of the night sometimes sending messages saying, can we cancel this? Can we move this? And people, probably get annoyed with me because at 3 a.m. they got an email or a text saying, can we move this or cancel this or shorten that? Because sometimes stuff gets added to your agenda that doesn't focus on the one thing you need to get done. But I recalibrate every night. I take my notebook out and I recalibrate every night. And every morning I start with a clear head. I never miss my exercise any day. So that's sort of, it's sort of a pretty simple, philosophy of trying as hard as you can to stay focused. And every time Friday comes, I look and I say, I didn't get enough done. Didn't get as much done as I wanted to. Didn't get enough thinking time. Didn't get enough reading time. And I say, okay, I'll have to do that over the weekend. And next week I'll try to do better.
I think that's fantastic advice though. After the year that's been, is just go back to the basics, go back to the day, breaking it down and do that one thing. David, we're just out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an incredibly insightful chat.
Oh, Gary, my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you so much. Stay healthy.